Hi. Tonight, I wanted to talk about fairies. And before the word ruins the room, I need to say what I mean. I'm not talking about tiny, glittery cartoon women with wings. And I'm not talking about something cute that exists to decorate a forest in a children's movie. I am talking about something older, darker, and much harder for me to dismiss. I'm talking about the hidden people. The beings people believed lived in hills, mounds, rocks, forts, forests, caves, fields, rivers, and the other strange places where human certainty starts to thin out. In Ireland and Scotland, they were often connected with the Aos Sí, meaning something like the people of the mounds. In Iceland, you find the Huldafolk, the hidden people. In Maya traditions, especially around the Yucatan, you find the Alush, often pluralized in English as Alushas. In the Philippines, you find the Duende and the Encanto. In Anishinaabe traditions, you find beings such as the Memegwesawag, and in Islam, of course, you find the Jinn. Unseen beings with intelligence, moral agency, and a life parallel to ours. Different names, different cultures, different religious systems, but again and again you find a similar pattern. Intelligent hidden beings, close to human life but not fully human, associated with land, taboo, offerings, danger, beauty, abduction, time distortion, and altered perception. So I guess the question tonight isn't just, do you believe in fairies? Because that question is way too small. I think the better question is, why does the hidden neighbor pattern keep appearing across human history? Why did people across so many places believe that the world was inhabited not just by humans, animals, and plants, but by presences just beyond ordinary sight? And why do some of the old fairy stories sound strangely similar to modern accounts of non-human intelligence, UFO encounters, missing time, and contact with beings that behave less like simple visitors from space and more like something older, wearing a new mask? This is where fairies stop being cute. This is where the archive gets weird. Because once you get past the modern cartoon, fairy lore becomes one of the oldest bodies of material we have about human contact with the unseen. And the deeper I go into it, the more I keep coming back to this one uncomfortable thought. Maybe the old world didn't believe the land was empty. Maybe it's just modern society. And I'm not sure modern society is the one that got it right. I think the first mistake modern people make is assuming fairy belief was just mythology in the sense of entertainment. In many older communities, fairy belief was not treated like fiction. It was treated more like practical knowledge. Fairy stories weren't just told and forgotten. People actually adapted and changed the way they lived their lives because of them. They avoided certain places, they left offerings, they protected cradles, they avoided digging into old mounds, they feared certain trees, they respected fairy forts, they warned children not to wander. They treated dusk, midnight, feast nights, dreams, and childbirth as moments when the boundary between worlds became thinner. And that is important because a belief has a different weight when it becomes a behavior. If people alter roads, avoid hills, leave food, carry iron, protect infants, and refuse to disturb certain places, then the belief has already become socially real, even before we answer whether the beings are physically real. This is why W.Y. Evans Wentz matters. His 1911 book, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, was one of the most serious attempts to document fairy belief as a living tradition. Evans Wentz traveled through Celtic regions, including Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, and the Isle of Man, collecting testimony from people who still carried the old beliefs. What makes Evans Wentz useful is that he treated the fairy faith as a living cultural and spiritual system, not just literary characters and concepts. He wanted to know what people believed, what they had seen, what their parents and grandparents had told them, and how the land itself was organized around those beliefs. For this episode, that matters because it gives us a bridge between old mythology and living testimony. The fairy faith was not simply once upon a time. It was, do not go near that mound. It was, do not cut down that tree. It was, do not mock what you cannot see. It was, leave them alone, and maybe they'll leave you alone. That's not really the emotional texture of fantasy, is it? It's more like caution. One of the most important early sources on fairies is Robert Kirk, a Scottish minister who lived in the 17th century. In 1691, he wrote The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. That title alone tells you something. He doesn't just call it some cute little stories about winged creatures. He calls it a commonwealth, a society, a hidden social order. Kirk describes fairies as subterranean and largely invisible people. He connects them with fairy hills, second sight, hidden populations, and interactions with humans. He talks about children being taken, nurses being stolen, and strange invisible house-haunting activity, like stones and wood being thrown around by unseen hands. I think this is one of the first major resets we need to make. In Kirk's model, fairies are not little sparkles. They're a neighboring population, near us, around us, sometimes under us, usually unseen, and sometimes visible to people with second sight. Second sight was the idea that certain people could perceive hidden realities that others couldn't. In Kirk's world, perception is not equal for everyone. Some people see more than others. That idea obviously bothers modern rationalism because we like reality to be equally available to all observers. But older spiritual systems often don't seem to work that way. Many traditions say certain realities require a particular state, gift, sensitivity, discipline, or vulnerability to perceive. Kirk's fairies exist in whatever that zone is. They aren't simply physical in a you and me kind of way. And they're not purely imaginary either, like anything we imagine right now while you're listening to this or while I'm recording. They occupy this middle category, subtle, hidden, social, intelligent, and somehow close. To me, that's why the secret commonwealth is so important. It preserves a worldview where reality has layers. Us, the human beings, live in one visible layer. The hidden people live in another, and sometimes those layers touch. I was wondering when I would get to this, but one of the darkest and most important fairy motifs is the changeling. A changeling is a child believed to have been taken by the fairies and replaced with another being. The replacement looks like the child, but something is wrong. The child becomes distant, sickly, strange, too hungry, too quiet, too odd-looking, too unfamiliar. From a modern perspective, this is one of the places where folklore, medicine, disability, and fear seem to collide. It's easy to see how changeling stories could have been used to explain developmental disability, autism, illness, infant mortality, trauma, or even sudden changes in behavior before, modern medical language existed. But I think the emotions under the story are terrifying. The person you love is here, but not here. They look the same, but they aren't the same. Something has changed, and you don't know why. Medieval scholarship shows that changeling-type language is pretty old. Some studies trace substitution language back toward the early medieval period, around the first millennium. By the 12th century, clerical sources were already arguing against the belief that children could be substituted or transformed. That means the argument is ancient. It isn't that everyone in the past believed and everyone is now skeptical. People were already fighting about this centuries ago. One person says the child is sick, another says the child was taken. One person says it's nonsense, another says you weren't there. And this is why changeling lore has so much force, I think. It sits at the point where human beings confront unbearable uncertainty. What happened to my child? What happened to this person I love? Why does the person in front of me feel different? And fairy lore gives that fear a face, just not a very comforting one. For me, after years of studying it, I've come to understand that fairy lore is deeply connected to women's lives. Not in like the shallow aesthetic way that you're all probably thinking of, but in the actual archive. When you look into it, it is connected to the feminine experience. Fairies are connected to the feminine experience. The stories circle around mothers, infants, midwives, nurses, fairy brides, women at thresholds, women as seers, women as transmitters of lore, and women as the ones blamed when something goes wrong in the home. Robert Kirk talks about nurses being stolen. Changeling stories revolve around babies and mothers. Fairy bride stories revolve around marriage, sexuality, taboo, and the impossibility of fully possessing someone from another world. It seems like this is really important because the fairy world appears again and again at moments when life is fragile. When a woman is pregnant, for a mother during pregnancy, birth, or nursing, even during infancy, during sickness, during night waking, and especially during grief. I think the home itself becomes a liminal space. We have to stop looking at the cradle as a piece of furniture. It's a threshold. The mother awake at night with a sick child isn't just tired. She's standing between life and death, sleep and waking, certainty and dread. Fairies gather at those thresholds. This might be one reason fairy lore has always had such emotional power. It deals with the places where human beings feel most vulnerable, and it especially preserves the fears of women in worlds where childbirth was dangerous, infant mortality was common, and medical explanations were limited. But again, reducing the lore to old explanations for illness is too thin for me. The stories also preserve a spiritual intuition that the beginning of life isn't ordinary. Birth is a doorway, and doorways attract attention. Fairies are not usually random. They're local. They belong to place. Hills, mounds, forts, rocks, trees, caves, rivers, springs, crossroads, old paths. I realize that was a long list, but fairies are everywhere. I had one more for the list. The edge of a cultivated field. In Ireland, fairy forts are one of the strongest examples. A fairy fort is often an old ring fort or ancient site that becomes surrounded by taboo. People may avoid cutting into it, building across it, or damaging it. Modern fieldwork in places like County Sligo shows that even when literal belief in fairies weakens, the taboo around fairy places can remain powerful. That is incredibly important because it means fairy belief can survive even when fairies become uncertain. Beings may fade, but the place stays charged. The old warning stays in the land. This is one of the deepest insights in the entire topic. Fairy lore teaches that land is not empty. A hill is not just dirt. A mound isn't just archaeology. A tree isn't timber. A rock isn't just some kind of obstacle to construction. The older worldview asks, who lives there? Modern society asks, what can we build there? I think that difference is enormous. And honestly, this is one of the places where the old worldview feels spiritually superior to ours. Not exactly scientifically superior in a simple way, but spiritually more cautious, or I guess humble. More kind of aware that human beings are not the only claimants on this earth. Fairy belief is full of rules. Do not disturb their places. Do not take what is not yours. Do not brag. Do not insult them. Do not accept fairy food carelessly. Do not join the dance without understanding the danger. Do not follow the music. Do not sleep in certain places. Protect the children. Carry iron. Leave offerings. And make sure you speak respectfully. This isn't belief as some kind of abstract doctrine. This is actual etiquette. I think that's one reason fairy lore feels so real inside culture. It tells you how to behave. In European fairy lore, iron is one of the most famous protections. Iron near a cradle, iron carried on the body, iron used in a doorway. Again and again, iron appears as something fairies dislike or cannot easily cross. In Kirk's material, protections around childbirth include bread, the Bible, and iron. In other traditions, salt, prayer, herbs, ritual words, or respectful speech appear. In Filipino traditions, the phrase tabi-tabi po is used when passing through places where unseen beings may be present. It means something like, excuse me, or please move aside. That small phrase contains an entire worldview. You don't see anyone, but you still say, excuse me, because your vision isn't the full inventory of reality. I think that's the humility that we've lost in modern life, and fairy etiquette is based on a simple idea. You might not be alone, so act accordingly. For me, fairy music is one of the most haunting motifs in the archive. In modern fantasy, fairy music sounds whimsical. In older lore, it's dangerous. A person hears music coming from a hill, a mound, a forest, or an unseen gathering. The music is beautiful, too beautiful. It draws them closer, and they follow. They see dancers, and they join in. Then, ordinary time breaks. A single night becomes years. A dance turns into a disappearance. And just like that, a song becomes a trap. This is one of the great fairy lessons. Beauty is not always safe. Fairyland is often described as luminous, rich, enchanting, full of music, food, pleasure, and impossible beauty. But the beauty has terms. You can be enchanted out of your life. This is spiritually important because a lot of modern spirituality treats beauty as automatically good. Fairy lore does not do this at all. Fairy lore says beauty can lure you away from your duties, your family, your name, your time, and even your soul. That doesn't make beauty evil, but it makes it powerful. And power requires discernment. Spider-Man stuff. One of the strangest fairy motifs is time distortion. A person enters a fairy place and spends what feels like a short time there. When they return, years have passed. Or they spend what feels like a long time in the other world, but almost no time passes outside. Fairy time does not obey human time. This is one of the strongest bridges to modern high strangeness I've found. In UFO and abduction reports, missing time is one of the recurring motifs. A person sees a light, has an encounter, loses a period of time, and returns confused or changed. Jacques Vallée took this seriously. In Passport to Magonia, he argued that modern UFO encounters resemble older fairy, elf, demon, and spirit encounters more than people realize. His point wasn't simply that fairies were aliens. I think that's too crude. I think his deeper point was that human beings might be dealing with a recurring encounter phenomenon that changes form according to the culture it's received in. In medieval Europe, the beings are fairies. In another religious context, they may be demons or spirits. In the modern technological age, they probably appear as extraterrestrials. We see that the costume changes, but the structure remains the same. There's missing time, strange beings, absurd behavior, messages, abduction, transformative effects on the witness, and unstable evidence. And of course, the sense that the encounter is both physical and psychological. This is where fairies become part of the modern NHI conversation. NHI, if you're not already familiar, means non-human intelligence. And if we are talking seriously about non-human intelligence, we should not only look at the sky after 1947, we should probably look at the older archives. Fairy lore may actually be one of humanity's oldest NHI archives. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't think the best conclusion is fairies were aliens. That feels too simple. It takes one modern category and uses it to flatten older traditions. I think the better idea would probably be that fairies and UFO occupants may be different cultural interpretations of a recurring pattern of encounter. We could say that pattern includes intelligent beings that aren't human, sudden appearances and disappearances, altered states and missing time, symbolic or absurd communication, abduction or invitation into another realm, bodily effects for sure. Psychological transformation has been known to happen, and the sense that the beings are close but not entirely accessible. And of course, I don't think this means every fairy story is a UFO story. And it doesn't mean every UFO occupant is a fairy. I think it means that the archive rhymes. And when we look at the rhyme, it turns out to be pretty important. Because the human mind may be encountering something that refuses stable classification. Maybe the phenomenon just uses the language of the age. Maybe we dress the unknown in like whatever symbols and visuals we already have. Maybe villagers saw fairies because fairies were the available category. And maybe modern people see aliens because technology and space are available categories. And maybe the underlying intelligence, if there is one, is actually stranger than both. Now let's go a little bit beyond the Celtic world. In Iceland, there is a strong tradition of the Hulda folk, the hidden people. The word itself is direct, hidden folk. They're often described as human-like beings living in a parallel world connected to rocks, hills, lava formations, and other natural places. They aren't always tiny. They're more like hidden neighbors. I think this makes them one of the closest comparisons to the Celtic hidden people. Modern Icelandic belief is also more nuanced than outsiders often portray. It isn't simply Icelanders believe in elves in some cartoonish way. Surveys and ethnographic work suggest a spectrum. Some people believe, some are uncertain, some reject it, and many treat the possibility with caution or respect. That middle category is really important. A person may not claim certainty, but still hesitates to mock the subject. A person may not literally believe, but still avoids disturbing certain rocks or places. Some people would call that childish superstition, but to me it's culturally intelligent uncertainty. In a world where certainty is often arrogant, there is something beautiful about leaving room for maybe. The Huldufolk tradition again connects hidden beings with land, dreams, darkness, seasonal shifts, and the careful management of distance from the unseen. Once again, the land is not empty. It has residents, both visible and invisible, human and other than human. In Maya traditions, especially around the Yucatan Peninsula, you find the Alush. The Alush is often described as a small being associated with fields, forests, caves, and sacred landscapes. Alushes can be mischievous. They can frighten people, they can protect crops, they can punish disrespect. Farmers in this culture may build small houses or shrines for them where they receive offerings. And the Alush isn't just another little creature story. It's about a relationship with the land. The farmer doesn't simply dominate the field. The farmer enters into a relationship with the unseen powers of the field. And again, the pattern returns. Small or hidden beings being tied to a place, being territorial, being helpful when respected, and dangerous when offended. And here, offerings matter. Human ownership is not absolute. And that last point is spiritually huge, actually, because modern capitalism says land belongs to whoever owns the paperwork. Old hidden people traditions say land may have occupants older than your paperwork. That is a very different way to live. In the Philippines, Duende and Encanto traditions preserve another version of the hidden neighbor pattern. Duende are often associated with mounds, underground spaces, termite hills, and hidden dwellings. Encanto are often described as enchanted beings or spirits who may interact with humans in powerful and sometimes dangerous ways. People may be warned not to disturb mounds or certain places because unseen beings live there. And again, we return to Tabi Tabi Po. Excuse me, please move aside. A phrase spoken into a place where no visible person stands. That is one of the most profound everyday rituals in any hidden people tradition. Think about it. You're acknowledging that you're not the only one in the room, even if it may look like it. It's a way to admit that you might not see everything. A way to understand that you're passing through and not conquering. It's a way to not offend what you can't perceive. I think that worldview might seem weak to some people, but to me it looks careful. And maybe carefulness is exactly what contact with the unseen requires. In Anishinaabe traditions, beings such as the Mamegwesawag appear in stories as small hidden beings, often associated with rock, water, cliffs, banks, and remote places. Métis traditions also preserve little people stories involving hidden beings, warnings, gifts, and respect. Of course, we have to handle this comparison with care because we shouldn't rip indigenous beings out of their culture and force them into this generic fairy category. I think that's obviously disrespectful and sloppy on my part if I were to do it. I think the point isn't that every culture secretly believes in the exact same creature. The point is that many cultures preserve stories of these small or hidden beings associated with place, respect, danger, and special perception. And when you look at these traditions, we see that they rhyme. Aos Sí are not Alushas. Alushas are not Duende. Duende are not Jinn. Jinn are not Huldufolk. But when human beings across cultures and across time keep describing hidden neighbors, I think we should pay attention. The pattern itself is data. It's not proof in a mathematical or lab sense, but it is data in the human sense. It's preserved in story, in taboo, in warning, and in place memory. Now let's talk about jinn. As a Muslim, this comparison is impossible for me to ignore. In Islam, jinn are a real created order. They're mentioned in the Quran. They are unseen by default. They have moral agency. They can believe or disbelieve. They aren't angels and they aren't human. They're this kind of parallel form of intelligent life. And that already places Islam very far from a strictly materialist worldview. The unseen is not optional. It's built into the cosmology. So when I read fairy lore, I do not feel the need to laugh immediately. The category of unseen intelligence already exists for me. But I think precision matters. Fairies aren't like European jinn. I think that would flatten both traditions. Jinn belong to Islamic theology. Fairies belong to Celtic and European folklore, with many local variations. Aleutias belong to Maya tradition. Duende belong to Filipino tradition. And the Hulda folk belong to Icelandic and Nordic cultural worlds. I get it, these aren't interchangeable, but phenomenologically, meaning like in terms of how encounters are described, there are strong overlaps. Just think about it. Hiddenness, intelligence, this weird moral ambiguity, association with place, the capacity to help or harm, contact with humans, the influence they have over perception, the fear around certain places, need for respect and protection. Those overlaps are real. So the question shouldn't be, are fairies jinn? Even though I guess I asked that before I recorded this. So anyway, the better question is, do fairy traditions and jinn traditions both preserve the idea that human beings share reality with intelligences beyond ordinary sight? That's the question. Because if the answer to that is yes, then we have a lot to deal with. And then, okay, once you open the category of non-human intelligence, classification becomes difficult. Fairies aren't angels in formal theology. Angels are usually messengers of divine order. In Islam, angels obey Allah and do not have the same moral agency as humans and jinn. Fairies are much more morally ambiguous. They seem to be able to help as well as harm, and for whatever reason, whether it's that they're egotistical or that they have a moral compass, they seem to reward things like generosity and kindness and punish things like arrogance and greed. They have been known to steal children. They have been known to heal, but also deceive. They've also blessed some and ruined others. I think this odd moral mixture makes them feel closer to jinn than angels. But in medieval Christian Europe, fairies were often suspected of being demons. Older land spirits and local presences were sometimes reclassified as demonic under Christian frameworks. And before you get the wrong idea, that doesn't mean Christianity invented fairy belief. I think it means Christianity inherited landscapes already full of beings and had to decide what those beings were. Some became demons, some became folklore, some became saints' miracles, some became children's stories, some became jokes. This is how spiritual categories move through history. A being can be a land spirit in one era, a demon in another, a fairy tale figure in another, an archetype in another, and a UFO occupant in this one. The experience may remain similar, but the explanation ends up changing. So we have to talk about the Cottingley fairies. We have to. In 1917, two girls in England, Aos Sí and Frances Griffiths, took photographs that appeared to show fairies near Cottingley Beck. The images eventually attracted huge attention. Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, became involved and wrote about them in The Coming of the Fairies. The photos were later admitted to be staged, using cutout figures. So yes, Cottingley was a hoax, even though one of the girls still said that there was a real picture among the fakes. But if the conversation ends there, I think we missed the deeper point. Cottingley happened after World War I. Millions were dead, families were shattered. The industrial world had shown itself capable of turning human beings into mud, smoke, and paperwork. Spiritualism was rising because people wanted contact with the dead. People wanted proof that the world was not only machinery and grief. Then, suddenly, two girls produced photographs of fairies. Of course people wanted to believe. Not because they were stupid, but because, dude, World War I just happened. I don't think Cottingley is proof that fairies are real, but it is proof that human longing shapes evidence. The whole thing teaches us skepticism, but I think it also teaches us compassion. People wanted the veil to be thin again. They wanted to wonder so they could survive the machine. I don't think that's something to sneer at. Maybe it's something you should try to understand. Of course, since I'm a clinical psychologist, I have to include the psychological layer. Sleep paralysis is one of the clearest examples of how body, fear, and culture combine. A person wakes up unable to move. They feel a presence. They may even feel pressure on the chest. They may see or sense a figure. Different cultures interpret that figure differently. A demon, a jinn, a hag, a ghost, an alien, a shadow person. It doesn't mean the experience is fake, it just seems to mean that it's interpreted through culture. The body produces a terrifying state, and then the culture gives it a face. Some fairy encounters may involve altered states too. Sleep, dreams, grief, isolation, trance, dissociation, intoxication, illness, or in some cases, even extreme fear. But the psychological lens does not automatically explain everything away. I think it explains just one layer. Human experience is never just data. It seems to arrive covered or clothed in meaning. A person doesn't really experience a neurological event. They experience a presence in the room. Maybe a voice, a light, a being, a warning, a call. That doesn't prove the being is external, but it also doesn't make the experience meaningless. This is where a lot of modern skepticism becomes too crude. It thinks explaining a mechanism destroys the meaning, but sometimes the mechanism is just the doorway. Fairy lore often seems to involve people who are more open than others. Children, seers, women at thresholds, artists of all kinds, musicians, poets, people who are grieving or very lonely, in any kind of emotional pain, people who know they're spiritually sensitive or in altered states, even people near death, people whose boundaries are thin. And that idea feels very relevant now. I think it seems like modern culture often pathologizes porousness. If you feel too much, sense too much, dream too vividly, notice too many patterns, or feel the mood of a place too strongly, modern life often treats that as a problem. Older traditions were also cautious about porous people, but they sometimes gave them spiritual roles like seers or dreamers or healers. or like the person with second sight. Fairy lore understands that openness is both a gift and danger. The same sensitivity that leads you to perceive beauty can also make you vulnerable to enchantment. I've experienced that too much in my own life. The same doorway that leads to wonder can lead to losing yourself. I've definitely lost myself through the doorway more times than I can count. I guess that is one of the deepest fairy lessons. Do not become so closed that nothing can reach you, but don't become so open that anything can take you. I guess it's kind of hermetic, right? As above, so below. Fairy bride stories are another major motif. A human man marries a woman from the other world. She may be a fairy woman, a selkie, or another supernatural bride, but there's usually a condition, like don't strike her. Obviously, I would hope not. Do not call her by a certain name. Don't ask her about her origin. Don't hide her skin. Don't break the taboo. And eventually the condition is broken and she leaves. This story pattern appears across many traditions. It often encodes male anxiety about female otherness, female autonomy, sexuality, marriage, and the impossibility of fully possessing another person. The supernatural wife is beautiful and intimate, but not owned. She comes from elsewhere, and she can return elsewhere. The marriage exists only as long as the boundary is respected. I think that is very spiritually powerful. The other world can enter relationship with you, but you can't dominate it. You can't possess it, which I guess reminds me of the divine feminine as well, and brings us back to fairies being tied into feminine energy somehow, or tied into the feminine experience. You cannot violate the terms and expect the magic to remain. I don't think fairy bride stories are just romance. They seem to be warnings about control and very relevant today. Are you a fairy bride? Let's talk about the gifts, because fairy gifts are often unstable. A person receives money, food, treasure, healing, or knowledge. But the gift may vanish. Gold can turn to leaves, food traps the eater, a blessing becomes a burden, a bargain has hidden terms. This motif matters because it appears again and again in modern paranormal accounts. Evidence is unstable, photos blur, objects vanish, recordings fail, marks appear and fade. A witness feels certainty but cannot transfer that certainty to anyone else. The phenomenon seems to give enough to transform a person, but rarely enough to settle the debate. That's how fairies seem to work. They leave traces that are emotionally powerful and evidentially slippery. And that slipperiness is one of the signatures of high strangeness. The encounter is real enough to change you, but not stable enough to convince anyone. That is a cruel kind of reality, and many witnesses of anomalous experiences know exactly what that feels like. One of the strongest interpretations of fairy lore is ecological. Fairy stories protect places. Do not cut that tree, do not disturb that mound, do not pollute that spring, do not disrespect that cave, do not treat the land as dead. Whether or not one believes in literal fairies, the social function here is powerful. A fairy taboo can preserve a site. A story can protect a grove. A warning can keep children away from danger. A belief can restrain greed. This is one area where I think modern life looks spiritually impoverished. We have become very good at extracting from land, but not so much at relating to it. Fairy lore says the world looks back. Modern society says the world is material. Fairy lore says be careful where you step. Modern society says, develop the property. Fairy lore says, ask permission. Modern society says, maximize value. And honestly, look where that got us. Maybe we don't need to literally believe every fairy story to admit that the old worldview preserved a kind of ecological humility we badly need. So what are fairies? There are at least 4 serious lenses. First, folklore. Fairies are stories that preserve cultural memory, land ethics, warnings, social rules, emotional truth, and local identity. The second lens is psychology. Fairies are symbols and experiences tied to dreams, grief, fear, altered states, disability, sleep paralysis, dissociation, and the unconscious. The third lens, spiritual reality. Fairies may be unseen beings or encounters with intelligences comparable in some ways to jinn, spirits, or other non-human entities. And the fourth, and my favorite lens, high strangeness. Fairies may be one historical expression of a recurring encounter phenomenon that also appears in UFO encounters, entity contact, apparitions, and other anomalous experiences. I think the mistake is choosing one lens too quickly, one that I've made too many times to count. The stronger possibility is that all 4 lenses touch part of the truth. The folklorist touches the story, the psychologist the mind, the theologian the unseen, the UFO researcher the anomaly, and the mystic, I guess, asks why they're all standing in the same room. I think that's kind of where this episode sits. So were fairies real? Maybe. But the better answer is that they were real enough to shape human behavior for centuries. Real enough to protect places and terrify parents. Real enough to guide customs. Real enough to survive Christianity, industrialization, photography, skepticism, and Disney. Real enough that we're still talking about them now. Maybe fairies were the hidden people. Or maybe they were jinn-like beings interpreted through European folklore. Maybe they were land spirits or encounters with the dead. Maybe they were psychological projections or archetypes. Maybe they were just a pre-modern NHI category. Maybe different cases point in different directions. From what I can tell, the archive doesn't give us a clear answer. It just gives us a pattern. Hidden beings, liminal places, mounds, children, women, music, warnings, taboo, beauty, missing time, abduction. The more you stack those motifs, I think the harder it becomes to laugh. You might not believe, that's fine, but I think laughing feels lazy after a while, because the people who carried these stories weren't simply entertaining themselves. It seems like they were trying to survive contact with a world that felt alive. And as sad as it is to say, maybe that is the deepest loss. Not that we stopped believing in fairies, but that we stopped believing the world was alive enough to require manners. Maybe the old people were wrong about the details. Maybe there are no courts under the hills. Maybe no child was ever taken. Maybe there are no hidden people under the rocks. Maybe every fairy photograph is fake. Maybe. But even then, the old worldview preserves something modern life desperately needs. Humility before the unseen. Respect for place. Caution around beauty. Awareness that children and mothers exist near sacred thresholds, The knowledge that not every intelligence announces itself, and the suspicion that time is stranger than just clocks, the feeling that the world isn't empty just because we stop listening. And if the fairies are real in any deeper sense, if the hidden people are more than a memory, if some intelligence does live near the edges of perception, then maybe the old warnings were not superstition. Maybe they were etiquette. Maybe the first rule of contact was never technology. Maybe it was just respect. And maybe before we ask whether fairies exist, we should ask a more uncomfortable question. If they did, would modern people even notice? Or would we walk straight through their hills, headphones in, phone out, laughing at the old stories, while something just beyond sight watches us and remembers when human beings still knew how to say, "Excuse me"? That, to me, is the heart of fairy lore. Nothing is empty. Not the land, not the dark, not the dream. The edge of the world is not empty, and whatever lives there has been waiting longer than we have been laughing.